The first time I saw her, Alexandra Sterling, I knew the room had already surrendered. Bordeaux Hall was alive with the usual hum of Friday night chatter, clinking glasses, and soft piano music. But the second her heels hit the marble, the energy changed. Every waiter froze, every diner paused mid-bite, and even the music seemed to soften, like it knew it had to obey her presence. She wasn't just a billionaire, she was a force of nature wrapped in black silk and steel, colder than a January wind, sharper than the crystal chandeliers above us. Alexandra moved through the room with eyes that measured, judged, and dismissed without effort. I sat in the far corner, aware I didn't belong. My shirt was plain, my shoes well worn, and my hands rough from a life that had taught me to work for everything. I wasn't here for status. I was here because my daughter Lily deserved more than just scraped together dinners and nights alone. Brian, an old friend who had moved up in the corporate world, had insisted I step into rooms like this. "People need to see you, Matt," he said over coffee, "and this is the room where doors open." I wasn't convinced, but I came anyway. As the doors opened and Alexandra Sterling walked in, the room fell silent. Waiters shuffled nervously, a hostess clutched her reservation book like it could save her life, and I could feel the tension rolling toward me like a storm. And then she stopped, directly in front of my table. "This is where you seated me," she said, her voice cutting clear across the room. The words weren't just a complaint, they were a verdict. Every head turned, every breath held. And that's when I did something no one else dared. I lifted my eyes to hers and said, calm and steady, "I don't think that's true. Everyone here deserves respect." The silence that followed was immediate, sharp, complete. A fork fell somewhere behind us, a sound that might have been the only noise in the room for a moment. Alexandra's eyes narrowed, assessing me as though I were a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" she asked, her tone dripping with ice. "Yes," I said, "but that doesn't change how people should be treated." For the first time, her composure faltered. She was used to hurried apologies, hasty corrections, people trembling to fix her displeasure before it grew. But I didn't flinch. I didn't scramble. I didn't apologize. I just met her stare, quietly, like I had spent years standing through storms no one else understood. Her lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but something caught between intrigue and disbelief. "Respect isn't owed to everyone," she said, her voice sharp. "Money dictates respect. Influence commands it. I've noticed," softly, "but fear isn't respect. Obedience isn't respect. Respect comes from how you treat people when you don't need anything from them. That's what matters." She blinked. Not many people challenged her like that. Not many people spoke over the roar of her reputation and emerged unscathed. I let my words linger. I let the quiet conviction of a man who had raised a daughter alone hold the space she was used to controlling with fear. The staff exchanged glances, some relieved, some stunned. Alexandra, the untouchable, the woman whose presence silenced rooms, sat back slightly, her posture still perfect, but her gaze flickering in a way no one else would notice. She expected submission, trembling, excuses. Instead, she found steadiness, dignity, and a calm she hadn't encountered in years. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a measured, deliberate motion, she pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. Every eye in the room followed her, yet here she was, choosing to sit with a man in a plain shirt instead of ruling from above. Her hands rested neatly beside her plate, and she said, coolly, "You speak of respect as if it is owed to everyone, but the world doesn't work that way." "I know that," I replied quietly. "I've lived it. But yielding to it, letting it shape how you treat others, that's your choice. You can choose kindness even when no one expects it." She studied me, her usual sharp gaze softening just a fraction, almost imperceptibly. This was not a challenge she was used to losing. And yet, here she was, unsure, caught off guard by a simple truth spoken without arrogance, without expectation, spoken with the quiet weight of a man who had lived through loss and chosen hope anyway. I could see it then, the storm behind her eyes, the walls built from betrayal and wealth, beginning to tremble, if only slightly. and I knew in that frozen moment at Bordeaux Hall that something extraordinary had just begun. She sat there, her eyes still sharp but no longer attacking. For the first time that evening, Alexandra Sterling looked like someone who had been interrupted, not in her authority, but in her solitude. I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the weight of years spent trusting few and commanding many. I didn't rush. I didn't press. I simply let the silence stretch, letting her process that she hadn't been met with fear or trembling like everyone else in the room. "Do you really believe kindness can stand against this world?" she asked finally, her voice quieter, a hint of vulnerability threading through the ice. "Money, influence, power, they control everything. Why should your approach matter?" I leaned back, hands folded loosely on the table. "It matters because it shapes what kind of world we give to the people we love," I said. "My daughter, Lily, she deserves to know there's goodness beyond wealth and influence, that the world isn't only ruled by fear or titles. That's why I choose kindness, not to prove anything to anyone here, but to her." Her gaze softened, though she hid it quickly behind a small tilt of her head. Alexandra Sterling had been armored for decades. Every word, every glance, every carefully chosen gesture had built walls around her that few could even glimpse behind. And yet, here was a man with no fortune, no power, no grand reputation, simply a father who had faced his own storms and refused to let them define him. The room buzzed faintly with activity around us, but I didn't notice. Bordeaux Hall had receded, leaving only the two of us, a fragile conversation threading its way between two very different lives. She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, still skeptical. "You think I don't know betrayal," she said softly, almost as if confiding in herself more than me. "Partners, friends, even family, everyone wants something. Love is always a transaction. And yet, here you are talking about respect, kindness, and hope." I nodded. "I've known betrayal too," I admitted, my voice steady but soft. "I lost my wife 4 years ago. Cancer. She left us, Lily and me, alone to figure out the pieces. Some days I wanted to hate the world, to let it turn me bitter. But Lily, she needed me, and I couldn't let the pain define how I lived. I chose kindness because she deserves it, because I choose it for myself. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary." Her hands curled lightly around the edge of her wineglass. I could see the conflict in her expression. Alexandra Sterling, the woman who had silenced boardrooms, held power over fortunes and decisions alike, was suddenly confronted by someone who carried nothing but integrity, and yet spoke with a conviction that demanded attention. "You speak of choices," she said, her voice softer now. "And yet, how do you remain unbroken? How do you face the world and not let it consume you?" I smiled faintly, the kind of smile reserved for moments when truth needs no embellishment. "Because I don't try to face it alone. Lily keeps me grounded. The people who matter, those who are worth it, are worth trusting. And even when the world turns cruel, kindness and dignity are stronger than fear. I don't need to be unbroken. I just need to keep going. For her." Her lips parted slightly. That imperceptible moment of silence, her exhale, her eyes softening, told me that I had pierced through more than her curiosity. I had touched something in her that money could never reach, her humanity. Alexandra had built walls to protect herself from betrayal, but walls can be isolating, and for the first time, those walls seemed to tremble. The staff moved cautiously around us, sensing the change. What had begun as a storm of fear and anticipation was shifting, a quiet tension giving way to intrigue. Alexandra Sterling, who had silenced rooms with a glance, was listening, truly listening, and that was rare. "You raise a point," she said finally, her voice deliberate, controlled. "Maybe there's something to your way, but it's dangerous to believe that kindness can conquer everything. People will take advantage, Matthew. You can't save everyone." "I don't need to save everyone," I replied gently, "just the people who matter to me. And sometimes showing care, even when the world expects toughness, changes more than we realize. You can choose to open a door instead of closing it. That's where the real power is." Her eyes lingered on mine. I could see the gears turning behind that practiced gaze. Alexandra Sterling was a strategist by nature, calculating, analyzing, and now she was confronted with a simple truth. Someone who had nothing but love and resilience had met her without fear. "You're unusual," she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips, though she tried to mask it quickly. "Most people either cringe or flee when I speak. You stay. You don't beg, you don't scramble. Why?" "For Lily," I said simply. "For the little girl who teaches me how to live every day. And because I believe some things are bigger than fear. Respect, dignity, kindness. Those aren't luxuries, they're necessities, and they're free to give." She leaned back, her gaze softening further, almost unguarded. Alexandra Sterling, the untouchable, the cold, commanding force of wealth and power, was shifting. Her posture was still perfect, her movements still precise, but beneath it all, I could see curiosity, vulnerability, and maybe even hope. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet between words became louder than any argument, louder than any power play she had ever executed. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Fear had never ruled this conversation. Respect had. And in that simple act of standing firm, of refusing to bend to intimidation, I had begun to unravel layers of isolation built over decades. Finally, she looked away, swirling the wine slowly, thoughtful. Maybe there's a world where trust isn't a transaction," she murmured, almost to herself, "where someone can act with kindness and it means something real." I nodded. "There is, and it starts with the choices we make, every day, even in small ways." Her eyes flickered back to mine, sharper now, but softer than before. Something unspoken passed between us, a spark of connection, fragile but undeniable. I didn't rush it. I let it settle, knowing that for Alexandra Sterling, this was more than conversation. It was a step towards something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: vulnerability. That night, as she finally sipped her wine and conversation resumed elsewhere in the room, I realized the first act had been completed. The storm had arrived, and it had met its match, not with wealth or intimidation, but with quiet courage and unwavering calm. Alexandra Sterling was seated across from a man she couldn't control, and for the first time, she was curious instead of commanding. The night didn't end with fireworks or drama. It ended with a subtle, electric shift of connection. And for a woman who long ago built her life around walls and power, that was more destabilizing and more thrilling than anything she had ever experienced. After that night at Bordeaux Hall, things changed, though slowly. Alexandra didn't call or visit immediately, but her presence lingered in my thoughts. I kept thinking about the way her gaze had softened when I spoke about Lily, the way her walls had trembled just enough for me to see a flicker of something human behind the armor. For weeks, I wondered if I'd imagined it, or if maybe, just maybe, I had cracked the shell of a woman who had never known softness. Then one Saturday afternoon, a sleek black car rolled slowly down the narrow streets of the South Side, far from the glitter of downtown Chicago. I opened the door to see Alexandra Sterling, impeccably dressed, standing hesitantly on the sidewalk. She looked out of place, far removed from polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but somehow determined. I greeted her with a calm smile, stepping aside to let her in. Lily, as always, was the first to break the tension. She bounded to the doorway, braids bouncing, eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the lady Dad had dinner with?" she asked without hesitation. Alexandra froze, clearly unprepared for a 9-year-old's directness. "Yes," she said softly, almost surprised at the simplicity of the question. "I am." "Do you like pancakes? Dad burns them sometimes, but I can make shapes," Lily added, grinning. In an instant, Alexandra's carefully constructed composure cracked, and she laughed, genuine, unguarded, and a little startled. She stepped inside, looking around at our modest apartment, scattered toys and mismatched furniture. It was a far cry from her world of luxury, yet there was warmth here, a sense of life lived fully, even without polish or perfection. We spent the afternoon together. Lily showed her drawings, chatted about school, and explained the elaborate stories she had invented about imaginary friends. Alexandra listened, sometimes commenting softly, sometimes just watching with that faint spark of curiosity. It was strange for her, I could tell. She was used to people deferring to her, listening to her commands, obeying her rules. Here, she was a guest, unguarded, with no leverage or power. That day, I watched something shift. Alexandra's posture, so rigid in restaurants and boardrooms, softened. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, softened as Lily climbed onto the couch to show her a picture of a cat with wings. She laughed again, quieter this time, and I realized that laughter had been missing from her life for years. I had glimpsed it in Bordeaux Hall, but here, in our home, it was more than fleeting. It was real. Over the next few weeks, her visits became more frequent. She came for pancakes on Saturday mornings, wandered through the aisles of the neighborhood market with Lily, and even helped me with small projects around the apartment. At first, she arrived hesitantly, unsure of how to exist in a world without luxury, without control. But slowly, she began to relax. She carried bags herself, laughed when Lily made a mess of pancake batter, and even joined in on small arguments about who got the last slice of toast. One evening, we were cooking together, the kitchen alive with the clatter of pots and the scent of eggs and cinnamon. Lily had declared herself sous chef Alexandra, rolling up her sleeves over a silk blouse. Batter splattered across the counter, and Alexandra's laughter filled the room, rich and surprised. I watched her from across the kitchen, realizing I had never seen her truly at ease like this before. The walls she had built for decades, walls of fear, of control, of self-preservation, were bending just a little under the gentle pressure of home, laughter, and care. It wasn't just Lily who was affecting her. Alexandra began to ask questions about our lives, about our routines, about things that mattered to me and my daughter, without trying to control or impress. She was curious, not commanding. She wanted to understand, not manipulate. And I realized that beneath the polished exterior, beneath the empire and reputation, was a woman who longed to belong somewhere she could simply be herself. Then came the rainy evening that truly marked a turning point. The storm outside rumbled low over the city, and our apartment flickered with the occasional power outage. Lily gasped softly when the lights went out, but instead of fear, she giggled at the idea of camping indoors. I struck a match, lighting a candle on our kitchen table. Soon, 3 candles flickered together, casting a warm glow across our little space. For a moment, we were just 3 people. No wealth, no status, no judgment, sharing the comfort of light, warmth, and presence. Lily rested her chin on her hands, eyes wide with delight. "It feels like camping," she said, and Alexandra laughed again, the sound light, unpolished, and real. We spoke stories that night. I shared the tales I invented for Lily when she was younger, about a brave little bird who built a home from scraps of ribbon and twigs. Alexandra hesitated when Lily asked her to tell a story too. She wasn't used to being asked for anything other than decisions and orders. But in that candlelight, with Lily's expectant face and my calm nod, she began to speak. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied, weaving memories of her childhood into a tale of a girl who built a tower of glass to protect herself from the world. When the story ended, Lily whispered softly, "If Miss Alex stayed here all the time, that would be so much fun." Those words struck Alexandra harder than any business challenge ever could. Miss Alex, not Alexandra Sterling, the billionaire, not the untouchable, the feared. Just Miss Alex, a woman accepted and welcomed by a child she had only just met. Alexandra looked at me then, her eyes no longer the steel of boardroom power, but the soft, vulnerable gaze of someone who wanted to belong. I smiled gently, reaching across the table to find her hand, not with the drama of a declaration, but with the quiet certainty of 2 people learning to trust each other. Lily's grin confirmed what I already knew. Something profound was growing. In that candlelit kitchen, with rain tapping against the windows, laughter filling the room, and the warmth of simple connection surrounding us, Alexandra Sterling began to understand that power could be gentle, that walls could be lowered, and the hardest battles, loneliness, grief, fear, could be softened by small acts of kindness. She was beginning to feel what I had known all along. Happiness wasn't a conquest. It wasn't about money or control. It was about being seen, being accepted, and opening your heart, even when the world had taught you to protect it fiercely. The weeks passed, and the rhythm of our lives began to settle into something neither of us had expected, but both had needed. Alexandra no longer arrived with hesitation or the rigid control she once carried like armor. She moved through our small apartment with a grace softened by laughter and curiosity, a quiet observer of life lived fully in the ordinary. Saturdays became a ritual: pancakes, scrambled eggs, and laughter that echoed in the small kitchen. Lily would insist on showing Alexandra every crayon drawing she had made that week, explaining each detail with pride. Alexandra listened, corrected nothing, praised everything. I watched from my spot at the table, seeing a transformation that money and power had never coaxed out of her. A softness, a warmth, a willingness to simply be present. One Sunday afternoon, we decided to take a walk through the nearby park. Lily ran ahead, spinning in circles, chasing pigeons, her laughter carried by the crisp Chicago air. Alexandra and I walked side by side, our steps unhurried, conversation flowing between light observations and deeper reflections. She told me about her childhood, her struggles in a family where love was conditional, her fight to build an empire that could never fill the empty spaces she carried inside. For the first time, she spoke without pride or pretense. "You know," she said softly, glancing at me, "I've spent my life proving that I could control everything, and yet nothing prepared me for this." She gestured lightly toward Lily, who was now balancing on a low fence, arms outstretched. "Nothing could have taught me how much I would want to be part of something that isn't about control or money, but about connection." I nodded. "Life is a lot like pancakes," I said with a small smile, and she raised an eyebrow. "Hear me out. You can try to make them perfect, golden, exactly the same every time. Or you can let the batter spill. Let them turn out a little messy and still enjoy them, still share them, still laugh at the imperfections. That's what matters." Her laugh came then, full and genuine, and she shook her head. I don't know why that analogy makes sense, but somehow it does. The weeks turned into months. Alexandra's visits became part of our routine, part of the life I had built with Lily. She helped with homework, cheered at Lily's small victories, and even joined us at neighborhood events, far from the safety of corporate ballrooms and polished floors. She arrived no longer with the tension of expectation, but with openness, curiosity, and a desire to belong. One evening, as we sat around the table with Lily asleep upstairs, Alexandra finally spoke words she had long kept inside. "I didn't know it was possible to feel safe with someone I barely know," she admitted, her voice soft. "I've spent so long building walls to protect myself, and now I find myself wanting to tear them down." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Walls protect, but they also isolate. You've given yourself a chance to trust, and that's stronger than any empire you've built. You're allowed to let someone in." She smiled, a little shy, a little uncertain, but full of something I hadn't seen in years: hope. "Maybe I've been wrong about what strength really means," she whispered. "It's not the fear people feel when you walk into a room. It's being brave enough to let someone see the real you." The days continued in their ordinary magic. Pancakes in the morning, walks in the park, grocery shopping with laughter and teasing. Alexandra grew into her new role, not as a visitor or a guest, but as a part of our small, imperfect, beautiful family. Lily's laughter became a daily melody in our lives, her innocent wisdom teaching lessons that no boardroom could offer. And then came the quiet evenings, when the city lights glimmered through the windows and the apartment was filled with soft shadows and warmth. We sat together, sharing stories, sipping coffee, letting the world outside exist without pressing its demands on us. Alexandra's hand found mine, fingers entwining naturally. It wasn't dramatic, no grand gestures, no declarations. It was quiet, steady, and real, the kind of connection that had been missing in both our lives. One night, as rain popped gently against the window, I watched her smile at Lily as she drifted off to sleep. "I think I finally understand," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Happiness isn't about control, or wealth, or power. It's about this: belonging, love, connection. I nodded. Exactly. And it's worth every risk, every vulnerability, every step outside the walls we build. Alexandra leaned back, a rare softness in her expression, the armor of the billionaire finally giving way to the woman she had been all along, vulnerable, tender, capable of love. Then I think, she said, ready. Ready to live, not just survive, to let someone in, even if it scares me. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The woman who entered Bordeaux Hall with icy control and unyielding power had learned the hardest lesson of all. True strength isn't measured by fear or dominance. It's measured by courage, by kindness, and by the ability to open your heart despite the scars life has left behind. As we sat there, hands entwined, Lily asleep upstairs, and the rain washing the city clean outside, Alexandra smiled at me. It wasn't the smile of a woman who commanded respect through wealth or intimidation. It was the smile of a woman who had finally found the place where she belonged, and in that belonging had found herself. And in that quiet, ordinary, perfect moment, we were no longer just two strangers or a child and a guest. We were a family, forged not by fortune, but by patience, resilience, and the gentle power of love. The walls had fallen, and what remained was stronger than anything Alexandra had ever known: trust, connection, and the promise of happiness shared together.